Thank you for watching live from Paris. Welcome back to France 24. These are our top stories at this hour. The deadly coronavirus has now reached Europe, with France confirming 3 cases. The news comes as the US confirms a 2nd case. Meanwhile, China's lockdown to contain the disease represents the first large-scale quarantine in modern times. Unborn children have never had a stronger defender in the White House. Those are the words of Donald Trump, who becomes the first president to attend the March for Life rally in America's 47-year history. Also coming up this hour on France 24, tens of thousands take to the streets in Iraq to call for US troops to leave the country. This in response to a call for Shia cleric Muqtada al-Sadr. Meanwhile, 2 protesters were killed and 25 wounded later in a separate protest. Thank you for watching live from Paris. We start with the US this Friday, which has confirmed a 2nd case of the new coronavirus from China. A further 63 potential cases from 22 states are also being investigated as the sometimes deadly illness continues to spread across the globe. Now, earlier, according to reports, 3 cases were also reported here in France. Now, as France 24's Catherine Viette explains, the first US case of the infection was detected on January the 21st in Washington state in a man who'd recently returned from Wuhan, where the virus started.
A first for Europe as France confirms 2 cases of the coronavirus, one in Bordeaux and one in Paris. Health officials say the man in Bordeaux has been placed in isolation and is responding well.
The patient is 48 years old. He returned from a trip to China where he spent several days. He passed through the city of Wuhan. He arrived back in France on January 22nd.
Officials said they're in the process of retracing the man's steps. Meanwhile, the U.S. has confirmed a 2nd case, caught by a woman who had also traveled to Wuhan, the epicenter of the outbreak. Health officials were quick to reassure the public.
She has not had extended close contact with anyone outside her home since returning from China and prior to admission to the healthcare system. So this is all very reassuring in terms of infection risk to the general public, which again remains low nationally and locally.
The Centers for Disease Control said 63 people in 22 states are being monitored, and so far 11 people have tested negative. While China works to curb the outbreak, the virus has already spread globally, with most cases concentrated in Asia, including South Korea, Japan, Thailand, and Singapore. Hong Kong officials say they're seeing more people with symptoms.
We try to limit the risk of spread to the community. For the 2 confirmed cases, I think we have been doing this for the moment. Yeah, but we have to see the other 2 cases if they are confirmed subsequently.
In response, countries around the world are stepping up screening measures at airports and encouraging anyone who's been to China who feels ill to visit a doctor.
Now, as this important story continues to unfold, here's everything you need to know about the new coronavirus from China.
In this hospital in Wuhan, one patient told Chinese state TV what happened after he started vomiting in his hometown nearby.
I went to the hospital after feeling ill for several days, and I realized I'd caught pneumonia. I was quickly transferred to Wuhan University Hospital, but by that time I was already in a coma.
Most of what we know about the Wuhan coronavirus is from severe cases like his. It tends to cause fever, coughing and shortness of breath, but we don't know how many cases with mild or even no symptoms there are, and we don't know at what point during symptoms the virus becomes infectious. Having killed in roughly 3% of known cases, it's clearly worse than most coronaviruses, which usually just cause a cold. Experts believe it to be less severe but more infectious than the one which caused the SARS outbreak in 2002.
The virus is in a similar family to SARS, but this looks different to SARS. And the difference is probably it's easier to pass between human beings. 10% of people died in SARS. I suspect the mortality rate with this infection will be lower than that as it spreads to a much wider population.
We don't know exactly how easy it is to catch, but coughing and sneezing probably transmit it. Further complicating things, the virus could mutate, changing how easily it spreads or how damaging it is. Like every coronavirus, there's no approved vaccine or antiviral drug. Recovery depends on the immune system.
And news just in, according to the latest report, some 15 people have been killed as a result of coronavirus in the Hubei province. That's, of course, where the disease started. We'll bring you more developments on that story as they come in. Now to a first in the United States, Donald Trump has become the first sitting president to speak in person at a March for Life rally. Earlier, he reiterated his support for tighter abortion restrictions. The U.S. leader also used his speech to attack Democrats as embracing, quote, radical and extreme positions on the issue. According to observers ahead of the country's election, now Trump is leaning in to his connection to religious and social conservatives. Let's take a listen to him speaking earlier.
When it comes to abortion, Democrats, and you know this, you've seen what's happened, Democrats have embraced the most radical and extreme positions taken and seen in this country for years and decades, and you could even say for centuries. Nearly every top Democrat in Congress now supports taxpayer-funded abortion all the way up until the moment of birth.
Now here's an update from Ketevan Gorjestani. I asked her how significant Donald Trump's presence is at this rally.
Well, the pro-life movement itself called it a watershed moment because it is very important for them to have the president, the sitting U.S. president, come and speak in person at that rally. Previous Republican president had decided against doing that. But this is really, for Donald Trump, the latest gesture of support for the pro-life movement, because ever since he took office, he's been giving them signals. First of all, he sent Vice President Mike Pence back in 2017 to attend the rally in person. That was also a first. Mike Pence has been going every year since then, and Donald Trump had always either dialed in via satellite or sent a video to the rally before this year finally attending in person. And the reason for that is that he wants to show his support because the religious right is really a key part of his conservative base, and their key issue is abortion, is the fight against abortion. And some of the posters that people were holding said, "I vote pro-life first." And that gives you an idea of how important it is also for Donald Trump, because he knows that these people are voting for the president who is pro-life, and they have said the same thing that he has claimed, which is that he is the most pro-life president in the history of the United States. So it's really a two-way street. Donald Trump supports them, they support him, and today was the coming together of these two aspects of the United States.
Ketevan, let's talk in more detail about what you just mentioned. Observers have been saying that Trump is using this rally to strengthen his ties with the conservative evangelical Christian base ahead of that very important upcoming vote in the U.S.
Yes, and part of his speech was to attack the Democrats, as we've heard in that soundbite. He really attacked them, accusing them of destroying the American family. But it has to be noted that that quote that he said that all the Democratic people in Congress were actually for abortions all the way until birth, that is in fact not true, because it is true that Democratic congressmen and women have a sort of litmus test these days to be pro-choice. That said, it is not true that they are for abortion all the way until birth. That is simply factually incorrect. But it gives you an idea of how important it is for Donald Trump to really insist that he is the one to protect life, to protect these American families against the threat of abortion. And he has vowed to continue on his line, which is appointing conservative judges all the way to the Supreme Court. It is the reason why this this rally is ending here at the Supreme Court, but he's also continuing to push Republican lawmakers to enact laws that restrict access to abortion, that restrict any federal funding for anything remotely linked to abortion, because ultimately for the pro-life movement, the real goal and the ultimate goal is here at the U.S. Supreme Court to try to overturn Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade, that is the 1973 landmark decision which guarantees a woman's right to get an abortion if she chooses, and to have that right not be completely restricted. And that's what the pro-life movement is fighting.
Now, staying with the US, a top general has confirmed that additional service members are being treated for concussion-like symptoms. This after Iran's missile strike on a military base in Iraq earlier this month that houses US troops. The statement comes after Donald Trump downplayed the injuries as headaches. Previously, he had denied that Americans had been injured at all. The attack was a reprisal for the US airstrike that killed Iran's top commander, Qasem Soleimani, a few days earlier. Turning our attention to Iraq now, where 2 anti-government protesters were killed in clashes with security forces in Baghdad. The report comes hours after thousands of supporters of Shia cleric Muqtada al-Sadr rallied separately to demand the ouster of US troops. Iraq's parliament has also voted to expel the US military from the country following that attack on Qasem Soleimani, but the Trump administration has said it does not intend to pull troops out. Here's the latest from our correspondent on the ground, Jack Hewson.
Iraqi protesters marched through the capital, Baghdad, today, calling for the ejection of US troops from the country. The protest was called for by Muqtada al-Sadr, the hardline Shia cleric who so many times has stood up to US influence here. Al-Sadr called for a 1 million-man march. We've not seen those kinds of numbers, but thousands were chanting anti-American and anti-Israeli slogans, many among them pro-Iranian militiamen. This sentiment, of course, has come about following the assassination of the Iranian general Qasem Soleimani at Baghdad airport on January 3rd. There's anger, clear anger at this unilateral breach of Iraqi sovereignty by the Americans. But many among the crowd were also there to voice their distaste to any foreign influence in the country. And of course, that includes Iranian influence. Iran has been hugely influential in Iraqi politics since the fall of Saddam Hussein. So many young Iraqis will be conflicted about attending this protest, as for the past 4 months the protest movement has been very much about trying to push Iranian influence out of the country. And of course Qasem Soleimani, a chief architect of that influence, who is understood to have been behind much of the brutal crackdown against the protest movement, which has resulted in the deaths of over 500 young Iraqis. So clear anti-American anger here on the streets of Baghdad today, but also conflicted feelings for those who want to see Iranian influence ousted from Iraqi public life.
Now, just when you thought strikes were over here in France and transport services were steadily improving, angry workers took to the streets again this Friday. And it's been declared a day of action, with unions staging a one-day walkout. This in a bid to call on Emmanuel Macron to ditch the biggest overhaul of the country's pension system since World War II.
On the 50th day of industrial strikes in France, French unions and thousands of protesters across the country are making a last-ditch effort to pressure Macron's government. They want them to scrap their planned pension reform, and on the street this Friday, protesters showed no signs of giving up.
We will continue. We haven't won yet, so we'll continue to fight and stay in the streets because we don't agree with what's been proposed.
Macron's government presented their new points-based pension system to the cabinet this Friday, bringing them one step closer to making it law. Macron says the current system is unfair and outdated, but so many on the street believe the new system would hurt the poorest workers the most.
We've seen this model in countries like Sweden and elsewhere, where the points system completely breaks apart and devalues the pension of retirees. And we don't want to be the generation that sacrifices the next. So for us, it must be total withdrawal of this reform. It's unacceptable.
The movement, however, seems to have lost some momentum. Travellers were faced with some disruption, but in the capital, for example, all metro lines were operating, albeit with an irregular service. A very different story to the early days of the strikes, when at times only 7 out of 16 would be operating. The Eiffel Tower was shut this Friday, and authorities at the Palace of Versailles and the Louvre Museum warned visitors of potential disruptions. Unions are planning to hold 3 more strikes next week.
Erin Agunkwe with that report. Now to some breaking news. An earthquake has rocked eastern Turkey, killing at least 14 people. More than 300 are reported to have been injured. Now, rescue teams and emergency workers from neighbouring provinces, as you can see in these images, have been dispatched to the affected areas. This in a bid to search for some 30 people who are reported to be trapped still under the rubble. Of course, we will bring you developments on that story as they come in the late hours of the night. As you can see, very dark there in Turkey.